head over now to Singapore and speak to James Dorsey. He's an adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And James, just to refer back to something that Mohammed mentioned there about the mother of one of the hostages accusing Netanyahu of being in Washington to try and sabotage the ceasefire deal. And whilst things seem to have gone well so far with the first, I think it's 5 now, exchanges that we've had, there does seem to be a simmering tension, and Prime Minister Netanyahu just seemed to bristle at every exchange about something he's unhappy about. The accusation from one of the mothers there that he's looking for a way out. Do you think that there is any substance to that accusation?
The answer is yes and no. With other words, I think that both Hamas and Israel want to see the fulfillment of the first phase of the prisoner exchange, which really is about releasing the first 33 hostages and up to around 1,900 Palestinians, and to start off negotiations for the second phase. And that's where the problems start to arise. Everybody focuses in the second phase on the completion of the release of all remaining hostages by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. But in many more ways, what the importance of phase 2 is that it will have to involve the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. To do that, you need an interim administration in Gaza, and you need an end to the war. Netanyahu does not want an end to the war. He does not really want a complete withdrawal from Israel from the west, from the Gaza Strip, and he does not want necessarily a Palestinian administration of Gaza. So a lot of the posturing that you're seeing, both by Hamas and by Netanyahu, is about control of the narrative and positioning for what was already expected to be a failed negotiation on the second phase of the ceasefire before we got the resettlement plan by U.S. President Trump.
If we look at the second phase, I think leverage is an important factor to consider here, because it seems to me the only leverage that Hamas has is the hostages that it still holds. Each time it hands over and returns some Israelis, it loses some of the leverage that it has. And under phase 2, remaining hostages would be returned. That would be Hamas out of leverage, as I would see it, and you may correct me on this. Whereas Israel is supposed to withdraw its troops, but that's something it could roll back. That's very reversible. It could happen in just an instant if Netanyahu decided to then return his troops. There's no rolling back the release of a hostage. And also, Israel continues to take, rather quietly, more Palestinian prisoners. As they are, we see the jubilant scenes of Palestinians being returned today. In the next week, we'll probably hear about more Palestinians being snapped up in the occupied West Bank under administrative detention. So Israel continues to gain more leverage in terms of the prisons that it holds. It seems like, how would you assess this? Because it feels, from where I'm standing, that the leverage is now moving in favour of Israel.
I think, again, the answer is yes and no. With other words, sure, hostages are the primary asset that Hamas has, and it is unlikely to surrender the remaining hostages, the remaining meaning beyond the 33 that were agreed to be released in the first phase of the ceasefire. It is unlikely to release the rest or agree to exchanges unless there is a firm and fairly ironclad agreement on an end to the war, not a temporary ceasefire, but an end to the war, and a complete Israeli withdrawal, which indeed is reversible, but nonetheless, that is always the case, and a agreed administration of Gaza. Hamas has a second level of leverage, which it demonstrated today, and it has demonstrated in the recent prisoner exchanges. And that is, it still is a diminished, but nonetheless, a cohesive group that has command and control, that is still armed, Some of those arms, according to some sources, were heavy machine guns that we saw today that had been captured from the Israelis in Gaza, and is capable of staging these events. It also means it's a force that in the future could convert into a guerrilla force. And that's something that the Israelis are also very concerned about. So Hamas is a weakened force, there's no question about it. Its assets are relative, but it still has a degree of leverage with or without the hostages.